Hello world. In this video I'm going to talk about my battle with leukemia. This will be the first part of two, where I'm going to talk mostly about the history, and then later on I'll be giving updates as things go along. The story starts 2 years ago, in the beginning of the summer, where after working in the garden I came in and took a shower, and I saw that I had red dots all over my wrists and my ankles and on the inside of my elbows. I thought nothing of it. I showed my wife, more sort of like what's going on, and she was concerned. So at that point she said I should see a doctor. I thought, well, it's probably nothing. But during the course of the weekend the red dots started to spread. She thought I might have an autoimmune sickness, but I wasn't too sure about what was going on. But Monday came, I was off from work, so I made an appointment with the doctor. And the doctor was also thinking, well, it's probably nothing, so he gave me the papers I needed, that if it got worse I could get some blood tests done. But he thought it was probably just some heat-related rash type thing, and I thought, well, probably sounds good. So at that point I thought I'd leave it. However, during the afternoon I started to develop large bruises over my body, which was pretty strange. The red dots at this point had also spread to my chest and my back. So when Tessa got home from her job, she saw that and said I had to make an appointment for the blood tests. So Tuesday I went to work. I wore long sleeves in the hot weather because I was trying to hide the bruises and the red dots, which I suppose should have been a sign at that point something was wrong. But I decided to just go to work, act as everything's normal, take a moment during work to phone for the appointment, which they said I could have a week later. So when I got home and told Tessa was not happy with that either. I suppose I could say she saved my life, because she said I had to push to get it sooner. So Wednesday I worked from home, which is a luxury I have in my type of work, is I can do that. And it allowed me the chance to stay at home and to take it easier, because I started to feel a bit sick at that point. I called my doctor to see if they could help out, and they managed to get me the appointment for the Thursday. The Thursday, when I woke up, I looked really bad. I was very pale, bruises everywhere. The rings around my eyes were very dark. And so I decided I should really probably get those tests done to see what's going on. I drove to the hospital, which in hindsight was probably a bad idea. Gave blood, answered a few questions, and drove back home. And I think I must have been home about an hour, in which I called work and told them I'm unable to work because I'm sick. I really didn't feel good. And then my doctor called, and he said that I have to make sure someone gets me to the hospital, because they've got to do further research into leukemia, because apparently that's what I had. They needed to know what type. I called Tessa. She raced home immediately, drove me to the hospital, and we spent the whole of that Thursday, the 22nd of June 2017, in the hospital doing tests. They were checking to see if I was fit, to see if I could handle chemotherapy. Doing more blood tests. They were going to try and see what type it was, and from that point on I was pretty much designated to staying at the hospital. Friday they did the bone marrow extraction, which I will say is one of the most painful things I've ever felt. And by Friday afternoon, at that point I'd sent Tessa home to rest, and my sister had come to visit. So my sister and I were talking to the doctor when they told me that I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia with the Philadelphia marker. Now that means the Philadelphia marker is a mutation, which is the cause of my illness. And what it means is it's one of the few leukemias that they don't keep under control, but under certain circumstances they can cure. Which is about the only good news in the news, that you have leukemia. At that point my blood platelets, when I went to the hospital, were very low. You're supposed to have a level of 150. I measured in at 3, which is why I really shouldn't have driven. As I say, it's by the grace of God that I made it to hospital and that I was safe, because in all rights and intents purposes I should have just been dead at that point. I understand why I felt bad. And then started a long journey in the hospital. I was allowed to go home that Friday night because they were going to start Saturday with the treatment, and I got prednisone because I had to kill the white cells. Basically what leukemia is the bone marrow, which makes your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your antibodies. They start making only white blood cells, but because they're not meant to do that, they make unhealthy, immature, underdeveloped white blood cells, and that's the leukemia. So you get the prednisone to kill the white blood cells, and they then plan in chemo to tackle the bone marrow. That's at least how I understood what they were doing. So I got prednisone. I was taking that for about a week, and they said the start of the second week I'd get chemo. Because of the prednisone, and it was doing damage to my immune system, but not that bad. I was allowed to go home the next weekend as well, just to have a couple of days, because the next couple of weeks were going to be rough, and I was going to be stuck in the hospital. I went into a chemotherapy treatment. Basically, it worked this way. I got 2 chemo bags on the Monday. The Tuesday I got a back injection for chemo in the through the nervous system. That's where the lymphoblastic part of the leukemia comes in. That is to make sure that it doesn't spread into your nervous system. And then basically Wednesday and Thursday was recovery. Usually by Friday I started to feel okay again. Weekends were okay. Blood levels were low. I got a couple of blood platelet transfusions and a few blood transfusions as well during the period. But usually by Monday you get the next bang of chemo, Tuesday the back injection, and by Wednesday you feel terrible again. After the last chemo, that Wednesday was my mom's birthday, so we celebrated that in the hospital, and we basically just had a good time. My parents brought some fried chicken and potato salad, so we had a nice meal. They went, and the next day Tessa and I were together, and all of a sudden I got a horrible stomach ache. I started to throw up without being nauseous, and by that point the doctor had discovered that the fat level in my blood was actually really bad. It was incredibly high. I mean, I was up in the hundreds, and that should measure at between 2. Well, you should measure under 2 if you're healthy. If you measure under 4, you're still kind of okay. Above 4, you're in trouble, and I was up in the hundreds. So they had to try and sort that out, and the problem with the pain and the throwing up was that what had happened is I developed pancreatitis, which is an infection of the pancreas, not bacterial or virus. This is what they call a clinical infection. Is because of the fats, my pancreas got pretty much clogged up and wasn't working properly anymore, and that started to cause problems as far as food digestion and eating. I was actually told I was not allowed to eat for a while. I was allowed to drink, and I was in pretty bad shape at that point. Having said that, also because the throwing up was not caused by nauseousness, it would come suddenly, so I was never prepared for it. So I actually pulled muscles in my shoulders and in my ribs, which meant breathing became very hard as well, and I was actually on morphine for all the pain at that point. I will say that pain at that point did not compare to the bone marrow extraction, because that was bad. And so at that point, yeah, I just had to try and survive that. And I have to admit, during that period of time, I lived from pull moment to pull moment. I literally would look at the clock, and I knew at 10 o'clock I could have the next morphine, and then I would try to make it to 12 when I'd get the next set of meds for whatever reason, and that's the way I got through the day. I slept a lot because I really needed it. I suppose my body had to do a lot of work. And there came a point where I had to start eating again. And the funny thing is, if you don't eat for about a week or more, you have to learn to eat all over again. So I started off with yogurts. I had to slowly start getting that up. It took, I think, me about 1.5 weeks before I started to eat meat again. And that's all because my stomach had to get back into action, get used to it all. And they wanted me on a special diet because of the fats as well. So it was all low fat. And I seem to think that means also low taste, because most of the stuff I got wasn't very tasty, so you don't want to eat, and then you got the pain and all of that, so it was pretty tough. And there was one doctor who said to me at one point, he said that next week he was on vacation. When he came back, he didn't want to see me again. And what he meant by that is I had to have, at that point, started to eat well enough that I could go home. And thank goodness that Friday I was declared healthy enough to go home. They did one more bone marrow extraction to make sure, to check how things were going, and they put me on a special medication which I give to leukemia patients with Philadelphia chromosome, because it will stop the protein markers that cause the Philadelphia mutation. So, or at least that the Philadelphia mutation is a wrong protein marker, and they can stop that. So I was on that medication, and the good news is I came out of hospital. I was in pretty bad shape at that point, but I started to at home do my own things. Slowly started to play around in the kitchen. I do love cooking, so I started to do that again. and started physiotherapy and started to build up my strength. And the medication I was on, which I called the Dasatinib, was actually working well, and I still had about a 2% leukemia measurement in my bone marrow when I left hospital. And after the Dasatinib, it cleared up, and I actually was in remission for almost 2 years. My immune system did take a bit of a knock, so I was more prone to infections and some sicknesses, colds, flus, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I was actually doing pretty well, building up strength. I'd started working again. I was at that point working 50%, and things were looking good. And that is where we'll end this part, because part 2 is when it all went wrong a second time, which we'll then discuss in the next part. Thank you for listening, and see you next video.